Hi, and welcome back to Dog Speak Live. Today we have the wonderful Clair Huckle, and Claire today is going to tell us a little bit about how behaviour and diet go together. So, a little bit about Claire. Claire grew up in Bristol, here in the UK, and has always had a passion and a love for animals, including wildlife. Claire lives at home with her husband Jonathan and their three Weimaraner called Autumn, Matt, and Hecker. Blair has a BSc Honours in Animal Welfare and Behaviour from the Oxford Brookes University and has a postgraduate degree in Animal Behaviour and Training from the University of Hull. And last but not least, is a valuable member of the Dog Training College, where Claire is a senior trainer and a student mentor. Welcome to Dog Speak Live, Claire.
Hi,
Um,
Colin.
oh, Smashing that you come on today,
Thank you.
and you're going to tell us a little bit about how diet and behaviour get married up. Over to you.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that lovely intro. I feel too big-headed now. Um, but yeah, diet does play a massive role in behavior. I'm sure some of you already have heard about that and you know about it and it's kind of in your head already. But I'm not a vet, obviously, just from reading my bio, I'm not a vet, but I have studied diet and nutrition over the years, and I've definitely seen how improving a diet or changing a diet can make a massive difference to animals' behavior. And we're mostly talking about dogs, but I've seen it in lots of different species that I've worked with over the years as well. So yeah, I mean there's a lot of neuroscience and neurobiology and stuff like that, and biological processes that go into it, and it is quite complicated. And I don't think we're gonna deep dive into all of it. But I think, thinking about it, having a little bit of an understanding of some of the processes of how things work, where things are, and how we can improve an animal's diet, so that we can then help them behaviorally, I think is really, really important.
Okay, so let's just say, for argument's sake, someone watching this is fully aware that their dog is behaving in a certain way. Let's pull one out of the hat. Has a dislike for, say, people. Yeah. Does that necessarily mean this is an aggressive dog, or will diet be playing its role there? As you also know, pain.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, whenever we've got any kind of behavioral cases or anything like that, the first thing that we should be doing is, sending them off to the vets, and making sure that we don't have pain. I think it's like 80% of cases are pain related, and then you've got the other 20%, there's something else going on, which could be diet related as well. There could be trauma as well. There's lots of different things that can be going on, and that trauma can sort of play into some things that are affected by diet as well. Because the brain and the gut are definitely connected, and we call it the gut brain axis, or in some cases the gut around it, we call it we've got a second brain. We call that sort of the intestines, and the stuff around the intestines the second brain. So we have our main brain, our first brain, and our second brain, which is happening down here, and that's part of the enteric nervous system. um so yeah, that's our second brain, and it's happening down here, and that's where all of that information is coming from. And then that information that happens down here goes up to the brain. It does travel up to the brain via the vagus nerve. So sciencey, because the vagus nerve is that two-way process of information coming from the brain down and then coming back up again, and it's all involved in mood. So if we've got that second brain and diet and everything going on down there, then it kind of goes to stand, if the vagus nerve is taking all that information up to the brain, it's going to affect the brain. So it's all there, isn't it? It's kind of, but we don't really think about it. We don't understand how that, we know that definitely food must play some sort of role in behavior, but how does that happen? And essentially that's what happens. But we have all the different bits, bacteria and things like that going on down there as well. So if if I've got somebody that's come to me and said their dog's expressing some behavioral problems, first things first, off to the vets. We're definitely going to check for pain. and then we're going to look also at other things, so diet and nutrition. Now, as trainers, behaviorists, whatever you are, what you want to call yourself, behavior practitioner, whatever you call yourself, we're not really able to specifically break down the macronutrients that we should be feeding a dog. We can make changes to that, but we can't advise in the way that a vet can, because they're sort of medically trained in that instance. So if we see something that's very specific and it's because an animal is deficient in very specific micronutrients, so that's our vitamins and minerals, for example, then that a vet would need to be able to run blood tests and things for that, to find out that kind of information. We can't do that. And all we would be doing potentially is making a guess at what might be going on. And we can't, guessing isn't what we're about, really, is it? We want good hard facts. Essentially, as trainers and behaviorists, we're looking at science, we're looking at behavioral sciences, aren't we? So we want good hard facts. We want to know exactly what we're working with, so that we can make those changes to the physical health of the animal, so that we can then also make changes to emotional and psychological behavior and emotion and things like that as well.
That's really interesting because we we train as behaviorists. We totally have an understanding that behavior isn't just something we do. It comes from an emotional standing place. Yeah. So when you're saying that the vagus nerve is doing its job, then the emotional impact that has from the gut is how we display behavior.
Mhm.
So we're sort of saying that they do get married, they marry up, and then what the dog does is for the vets to come back with a result, and we will know one way or another whether it's pain or gut.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, how does one then, where let's just take my dogs for instance, I'm feeding my dogs. What kind of behaviours would I be or need to be aware of? For me to think about the gut, the diet, it could be bad or not good.
So when it comes to behaviors, I mean, there's lots of different things that are related. So we definitely see depression and anxiety can be linked to poor diet or dietary deficiencies. Aggression can be part of that as well, because it's linked to anxiety, as well as being linked to pain as well. Because if we're feeling particularly anxious, then we're going to express ourselves in a way that says, I'm really anxious about a situation, and actually you're putting stresses onto me that I'm really not happy about. And that's when our sympathetic nervous system would kick in, and where our fight or flight process happens, because we're feeling lots of anxiety. So when we feel anxiety, we get this rush of cortisol, so we get stress, we get adrenaline, and that means that our amygdala, which is sort of the back, kicks in, and we're not able to process information. Whereas if we've got a really, really good diet, then everything is being processed at the front of the brain. So we've got less stress. So we've got the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and everything is kind of getting information, but we're not releasing all those extra hormones that sort of saying, we feel really, really anxious, so we need to go into fight or flight. And then, if we can't get away, then we're going to go into fight. We're not going to leg it and things like that.
So I always say to the clients and trainers I work with, student wise, be as observant of the dog as you possibly can. Yeah,
Mhm.
because all the information we need to know about the individual gives them feedback about themselves. Yeah, so the more we can, process who they are, what they're doing, and what they find easy and what they're struggling with, can give us an indicator about pain, diet, lack of sleep. Yeah. I mean, even if we digress off of this one and go into areas of sleep and stuff, that's okay too. Yeah. So
Yeah.
how on earth does one, okay, I know we're not vet, so we're not vets. The dog goes to the vet and now has their check up their full blood count. Yeah. Do you have any idea how the vet would they be able to say it's directly the gut, the diet needs to change? Is that how that works? After they've gone off a test, the bloods would have to go off a test and be tested, what have
Yeah.
you?
So if they're noticing that there are very specific markers in the blood that are letting them know that there's no vitamins and minerals, there are things missing. B vitamins are a big one. They're a massive thing when it comes to behavior. If they're not seeing all of those sorts of vitamins and minerals, those B vitamins, things like zinc as well. It's quite common in some of the sled dog breeds that they can be lacking in zinc, and that can have an effect on behavior as well. So if they see those deficiencies in the blood test that they run, then they're going to come back and go, okay, your dog is deficient in this. They won't necessarily say that let's look at a dietary change. They may. Depends on the vet that you've got. Some may turn around and go, okay, the diet that your dog is on is just not appropriate, and I think we can manage this with diet. They may just actually recommend dietary supplements instead. And actually, we can add some dietary supplements into our dog's daily process and a routine ourselves, just to see if that can make a difference. In some cases it can. In more severe cases, where we've got real, like, very strong anxiety, we've got a problem that's happening in the gut, and then that's affecting the brain as well. It's kind of like a vicious circle. If one's not right, then the other one's not right. Everything's out of balance. I mean, the body is always striving for homeostasis, isn't it? And if one is out of balance, the other's going to be out of balance. If we can get one balance, then we can work on the other one, and everything then should line up. But that balance changes on a daily basis, actually even more than a daily basis sometimes. So it's fluctuating. What we are one day is very different to what we are the next day. So yeah, just like you. Yeah, I think we're all like that, aren't we? um but yeah, so I mean, what we put into our body affects the bacteria that we have in our gut, and then that is going to affect how we feel in different situations. So it's yeah, so on the daily, because we don't eat exactly the same balanced diet every single day. Everything's going to fluctuate, and we're going to be all over the place. And then taking into consideration other things like age as well. So we get hormone fluctuations with age. Um, you know, dogs that are going through peaks in hormones because of seasons in bitches, or elevated testosterone in our adolescent males and things like that, because of those hormone levels, that can affect things as well. And that fluctuates almost sort of hourly, minutes, every daily, monthly. They're changing all the time, aren't they?
So in other words, having bloods done is hugely important.
Hmm?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hence why we tend to encourage people to go and have a vet check, physical checkup, and don't forget to ask them if they can include a full blood count. Yeah.
yeah.
Because you just sort of hit the nail on the head of all the different things that can be found in bloods.
I would say that, I mean, even in dogs that are on a particularly good diet, a blood test is not a bad idea, because even if you've got a really, really good diet, you could be missing something. Could be something going on. But a marker for letting you know that that's a route of investigation to go down is the quality of the diet that your client is feeding. Um, so if you've got a diet that's not the best quality, is baked to within an inch of its life, full of preservatives and things like that, then you might kind of go, not the best diet. So maybe we need to look at improving that in some way. But the behavior that we're seeing, could that be linked to that diet? And quite often it is. Then the vet can go, okay, let's do all of these tests, let's find out what's going on. It may be that the client just physically cannot afford to pay for anything better. And that's an important factor to take into consideration. Cost, yeah, they may have just paid out however many hundreds of pounds to see us as professionals, but that they may have saved up for a while to do that. They may have payment plans. Insurance may be covering some of that as well. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to afford to pay for a better quality diet. So we do have to take that into consideration, and maybe something like a dietary supplement to help with their vitamins and minerals is cheaper in the long run. So they
Mm.
stay on the diet that they're on, and then they have the dietary supplements on top. And maybe that does make a difference to the behavior of the animal. But if you've got somebody that could make changes to their diet or their dog's diet to see that positive change in behavior, and we don't really need to look at dietary supplements in that instance, then we could go down that route instead. But it making sure that we check is really important, even in the dogs that are on the best quality diets. And when it comes to best quality, I mean, there is the All About Dog Food website, which is really good. Definitely worth looking at that. It's a really good resource, I think, just for looking at different ingredients in foods, quickly being able to compare and contrast. It's all nicely explained. I mean, they're all over social media as well. They've got a really nice TikTok following as well. So you can go onto there and he talks through all of the different foods and things, which is really nice. It's making it accessible as well. And also, I mean, speaking of sort of social media platforms as well, the Raw Pet Medics are really, really good at helping people with things like this as well. There's two vets and a dietary specialist, his PhD. They're absolutely amazing. And you can drop them little questions and ask them things. And because they are vets, they are better placed to talk you through the kind of tests that you're going to have to run and the results of those tests and how they might do it. And because they're allopathic as well as homeopathic or vets, they can take you down both routes. You know, how an allopathic vet, which is what we would call a normal vet, would do things, and how a homeopathic vet would do things, which is what, you know, the sort of the herbs and all those kind of different remedies would work instead.
That's really interesting because I can be stubborn in sometimes my way of thinking about the normal way of doing something, and then maybe probably saying the word, yeah. Does it really work? This is what lots of people would ask. Why would
Okay.
I go to see that vet when I have this vet that does what I would like him to do? I mean, I'm now, well, for the last 15 years, I'm very much inclusion of both, including both, simply because they both work. Yeah. How
Yeah.
do we not convince? Because I don't believe we should be here to convince people. How would you put both arguments so that the client could go to another for a second opinion?
So, it depends. So with some of the homeopathic vets, they will not see you unless your dog is on a very specific diet. So straight away, they won't see you unless you're maybe raw feeding or fresh food feeding. If you've got your dog on a processed diet, then they're less likely to be happy to see you, or they would require you to say, okay, we'll see you, we'll look at you, we'll look at your case, we'll help you. As part of your treatment plan, you are going to have to change your dog's diet. And they will help you with that. You know, they'll go through the whole process of changing the diet, making sure that you do understand how to do it, the diet is balanced and everything that the dog gets is right for the dog. But because they're also a vet, they're able to run blood tests and things like that. They can add in the different supplements. They can mix the diet in a very specific way. Um, it's about just sort of sitting down with the client and saying, what are you open to and what is possible for you? Because fresh feeding and raw feeding are not necessarily going to be accessible for some people. Raw feeding, for example, the best process or the best way to do that is to buy in bulk, bung it all in a freezer and defrost it. But then how you do that makes a difference as well. You can get a lot of pre-made, pre-mixed diets that are kind of balanced. Or you can go DIY, which is where you buy all the bits yourself and you have to work out your percentages of your muscle meat, your offal, bone, and what other sort of carbohydrate type things go in there. So by carbohydrate type things, I'm talking about your fruit and veg and other things, you know, that sort of stuff. You know, what are you going to add in there? Bits of yogurt and things like that, what cheese and things like that. Some of those things are probiotic as well. So probiotics are the things that you put into your body to feed the the prebiotics. Sorry, some of those things are prebiotic, get my words right. There's so many different biotics. So prebiotics are the certain foods that you put into your body that go down and feed the bacteria that are in your gut, and those are your probiotics. And then they sort of they're sitting there going, feed me, feed me, feed me. They're helping to process all of that food. And then afterwards we have our postbiotics, which is everything that's left behind, which is your amino acids, and your vitamins like B vitamins and things like that that are all in there. That's everything that's left behind that the body then has to process. So those are the things that are precursors to hormones that help us to feel better, like serotonin. So certain things that we put into our bodies, so certain supplements and certain foods, have got those amino acids in them so that they can then kick off those hormone processes.
You know, I always say I don't like talking about food, dog food, because it just does my head in. Yeah. And then you go and mention fruit and veg.
Are you not a fruit and veg man, Colin?
I'm not a fruit and veg man for myself, but I've also come to learn that certain fruit can also cause certain behaviours due to development. You can put me right here of yeast. And yeast that it can, oh, does it? No, you can put
Yeah,
it.
so you can get yeast imbalances with certain foods. That can be I mean you can stop feeding those foods and reduce them down. And I mean some of those foods can the way that some of that presents, those yeast imbalances present, is things like your dog looks like it's drunk because it's the yeast create alcohol in the system and they act drunk. And then you end up with owners that are really, really panicked because they don't know what the hell's going on. So yeah, so I mean that would be an imbalance, and this is why, being able to talk to a nutritionist or talk to a vet who's got an understanding of these things that can balance the diet is really important. It's and actually those sorts of things, when we talk about fruit and veg, if you are going to go for a DIY diet and adding in those sorts of carbohydrates, that's a very small proportion of the diet. It's like 5%, if that, in some dogs. It's very, very small. Whereas the other 95% is your muscle meat, your offal, and your bone. So it's very, very small. You don't want to be giving too much. And we've also got to remember that although dogs do produce amylase, which means that they can break down those carbohydrates, they don't have amylase in their saliva like we do because they don't masticate. They don't have that side to side jaw movement because they're not masticators. I mean, we sort of evolved from herbivores, which is why we've got this side to side movement. We've got these big flat molars. Canids don't. They've got these big cutting carnassial molar teeth at the back of their mouths. They're literally chompers. They just chomp off chunks and swallow it. So they don't have the amylase because they don't need it. They've never needed it. They're from their biology, they just don't need it. They do get it. Dogs do get it further down, and they've kind of evolved that. Wild canids don't have it so much, but our sort of our domestic dogs do. So they can process things, but still they can't process too much of it, which is why it's not unusual if you feed your dog a carrot, you're still seeing chunks of carrot coming out the other end, because it doesn't break down quite so well. That's not what their body's all about.
That's quite interesting, because on the occasions where ours have had carrots, you're forever going around sweeping up bits of carrot out of the back because they're moving.
The
Both of
little
mine
bits.
tend, yeah, both of mine tend to move around while they're doing their bits and pieces. So anything where you've got carrots in it, there'll be bits of carrot there, bits of carrot there. And so what we're also saying is that diet, although it's really, really important, um, can also be difficult for some simply because of finances.
Mhm.
Um, and then we have the difficulty of what I call the lower end of the kibble market, the middle end of the kibble market, and the very high end of the kibble market. And a lot of people don't believe that the high end and the middle end are any better than the lower end. Yeah. I personally believe there is. Yeah. They're huge because, especially at the top end. You agree? Disagree?
No, I think there is a big difference. If you look at the ingredients, the quality of the ingredients, some of the processes are very similar. I think with cold pressed and freeze dried, I think we've got better processes going on there than we have with the extruded kibbles, for example. Because they're still baked, they're still cooked. They may still have vitamins and minerals sprayed on them afterwards, because although you've got better quality ingredients going into some, it's still baked at like 90 degrees for a period of time. What nutrition benefit is going to be left after that? And that's exactly the same as the lower quality stuff that's going into those lower quality kibbles. And actually, with those lower quality kibbles, we're quite often seeing like high levels of grains and things like that going in there as well, which are just essentially filling up the dog. Which is why if you don't have a dog that burns off all of those calories, you can end up with you're more likely to get a fat dog that's on those lower quality foods. Whereas if you're on those higher quality foods, you've got less grains and you've got less sort of those that kind of carbohydrate in there. You're still going to have a relatively fit and healthy dog. But I mean, I think when it comes to that, I mean, at the end of the day, it's what suits the dog a little bit as well. Um, some dogs, I mean, you could put a bowl of fresh chicken in front of them, like raw or cooked, and they might just look at it like it's foreign, like it's an alien thing. Um, but if you put a bowl of I don't know, bakers down in front of them, they'll chow it down like it's like McDonald's. Um because there are, maybe it smells absolutely amazing to them. Um because of what they've sprayed on it, or what, the way that they've made it. I don't know. I'm not a dog. But they do seem to like it. And but I just, if you lived on McDonald's every single day, what dietary deficiencies might you have? Um
Well, not. Um, but even if when we look at the human mammal, it was only the other day I was hearing on the news how the human mammal child, yeah, is suffering because that's all they can live on, because that's all they can afford. Yeah,
really?
yeah. So it was quite interesting and sort of like, what's the word, upsetting at the same time how children go off to school with no breakfast. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So dogs and humans have some similarities where food is concerned, or deprived, yeah, and some at the top end,
Mhm.
yeah, because their owners can afford it.
Yeah, and actually, when we're looking at young animals, we're looking at our little puppies, or even in human animals as well. We've got our human animal and our non-human animal. um Either way, if we put in all the good stuff when we've got a young animal in front of us, we are probably going to be able to, if you do as an older animal go on to a lesser quality diet, you've started that young animal off in the best way possible. I think there has been some research, I can't think where it is off the top of my head, into the bacteria, the gut bacteria and stuff in the intestines of young animals. And if you get all of the really good bacteria in there by so when I was sort of talking about how things change every single day, the bacteria that you have in your guts can change daily depending on the kind of food that you feed. So if you're adding a different fruit, different veg, different meat sources or protein sources and things like that, then that is going to have an effect on the bacteria. It's going to change slightly. So if you start adding in all of those different things into younger animals when they're little, you're setting them up to succeed. You're getting all of that good bacteria in there. Now, you can't do that in an older animal. If you start off with those little animals getting all of that in there at the right time, then it kind of is there. Even though you might give antibiotics at various different life stages, which does, excuse me, tend to clear up, sort of kill off quite a lot of bacteria, we can still repopulate by using probiotics and prebiotics and things like that. But if you start them off as little puppies in that process, you're more likely to have an older dog that can cope with a lot more as they get older. Whereas if you don't do that and you don't introduce that, and now that's one of the sticking points, I think, in how we feed our dogs. By feeding them the exact same thing all they do is eat the same food every single day, every single meal, then that means that they're only going to get the bacteria to cope with that certain food every single day. Yeah. Whereas for you or me or a dog that's maybe fed on a fresh diet or a diet that varies between protein sources, for example, their bacteria is gonna be changing all the time. So that means that their system is going to be ready for something different that pops up. If it, you know, if they're not just eating the same thing, so they don't just have the bacteria to cope with one thing. They've got lots of little different kinds of bacteria sitting there just waiting for the thing that they really want to pop up, and then they can deal with it and they can process it. So I think it's vitally important to make sure that the diet that we give our puppies is the best quality ever. And then, once we've gone through the whole growth process and everything, then, if you can't afford to keep them on that such quality diet in later days, then, put them on something else. But certainly when they're growing, that's going to have a massive effect, because you can't bring that back. If you've got that really, really rubbish diet in that little puppy, that's going to have an effect on the brain. Remember the gut brain axis and all the processing and how that's going to affect them. If you've got a rubbish diet, that's going to affect the everything that goes to the brain. So we're more likely to see long-term behavioral problems that we can't change. Doesn't matter what we do, we cannot change them. So when it comes to those cases that are really, really severe, and we're using medications and we're trying modification, trying behavior, sorry, one of my dogs was asleep and there's a dog crate behind there, and he just some big noise and he jumped up, hit the crate, and all hell broke loose. So yeah, so if I'll get myself back on track now. Yeah, so if we're I have gone.
Puppies,
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 yeah, talking about puppies. So if we're feeding that really, really good diet, then they're more likely to be able to cope with all of that. But even if we've got an animal that has had that really, really bad diet, and we're giving in later days, we're seeing lots of behavior problems, we're adding in supplements, we've improved the diet, we have maybe sort of not giving calming supplements, we're maybe giving anti-anxiety medications, or something like that, to help them, try and support them through a behavior modification plan. Then we're still not going to be able to do that. So that might be a case where you're never ever going to be able to solve the problem. You're never going to, well, I say solve the problem, you're never going to be able to change that behavior, because all the damage was done in those first few months of life when they were growing, because the diet was so poor that they haven't had the correct diet and nutrition and vitamins and minerals and hormones and everything at the right stages to properly develop their brain. And then as they get older, this comes out in behavior issues. So that may be that's going to look like a long-term management, or in the more severe cases, that would be a conversation about euthanasia.
yeah,
Nobody wants to have that conversation. But potentially, depending on how severe the problem behaviors are, then it's there, it's on the cards. And yeah, I think you can tell from even from my behavior, then when I started talking about behavioral euthanasia, I was like, I don't like talking about it. It's not
it's
something.
real.
Yeah,
It's a
it's real.
reality.
It is
Real,
real.
it's a reality. No one wants to talk about it, but there are times where we have to broach that subject,
Mhm.
which then broaches another subject, into the sense of how do we educate people, dog owners, that even before we acquire our puppy or dog, whether it's a rescue, that we must take seriously their diet.
So, I mean, as trainers, I think we could definitely, or trainers, behaviorists, how, whatever you, like I said, whatever you call yourself, we as professionals, that's something where we can help out. Also, vets can help out. The biggest sticking point in this, I think, is that a lot of people don't seek out the help of a professional before they get their puppy. There might be the odd one here or there that will talk to a professional and say, can you help me with picking a puppy that's appropriate for my lifestyle? I think in the last 10 years, that's only happened to me once in the last 10 years, which is interesting, isn't it? But not very many clients will actually come to you and say, like before they've got their puppy and want to have a conversation with you. I do have some clients that they picked their puppy, it's coming home, and they will contact you. And you can have that conversation and you can go through talking about how to pick a really appropriate diet and the importance of diet in, especially in those very early days and weeks and months with your puppy as they grow, but also talking about appropriate socialization, appropriate training, how to settle the puppy in, sort of the expectations that they should have of their puppy behaviorally in those first few weeks and months. So by offering what I was sort of a pre-puppy package essentially, or a pre-bring your puppy home package, you could sell it separately or you could sell it all in one go. So, you know, you get a Zoom or a one-to-one with a professional before you've got your puppy home to have this big conversation. Then as part of your package, you get your puppy pack. So you might get some training treats that are really nice and healthy. There are a few brands that I like. Feel Wells. Feel Wells is quite nice. They're dry, they're moist, but they don't have grains in. They're full of natural things. There's no preservatives or anything in there. They're a nice company as well, quite, you know, ethical. Lovely to talk to on the phone as well. So Feel Wells are really good, but you can also use, you know, fresh fruit, veg and things like that as part of your diet for rewards and things. But actually, just using fresh fruit and veg as part of your rewards for training can actually improve your dog's overall diet because you're adding in those macronutrients. That's a way of improving your dog's diet without even realizing you're doing it sometimes, or getting your client to do it without them realizing you're doing it. But yeah, so having that conversation with them, and then it's part of your package. So then they get their puppy pack with all their, you know, discount codes and things in there. You give them some treats. They might get a booklet with some training advice in there, some just general advice. You know, I do that. I've got my puppy book, which has got little bits about local bylaws, main laws as well. You know, things, you know, stuff about the Road Traffic Act and keeping your dog on lead, and the importance of the information that you're meant to put on collar tags and stuff like all that kind of thing. Then they also get their training package. So that may be a block of just classes. They may go for a block of classes and one-to-ones, or they may not choose classes. They may just choose one-to-one. And then you may just sort of add in things like access to WhatsApp groups, access to Zooms. They may get a discount off of any future training that you want to do. So you can bung all of that in there. And you can have the conversation about the kind of food that your puppy's going to eat. And the importance of the diet in those early stages, because you've got them. And then you can keep them on track for as long as you possibly can with that. And if they're finding any issues with the diet, and it's not unusual, to be perfectly honest, to see issues, gastrointestinal issues when people bring a puppy home in those first few weeks because of stress. Yeah. So, I mean, stress is you know, it's stress and anxiety is linked to poor digestive systems, and that in itself can sort of have a link behaviorally as well. So if we're a little bit stressed, we're not processing our food properly, then we might see poor sleep, and also poor behavior. So we might see puppies that are more likely to bite, because they're not getting the sleep that they need, they're not getting the right nutrition. So this is why in those first few days, you know, we tend to advise people to keep the puppy on the food that the puppy was on when they were weaned with their breeders. You want to change as little as you possibly can, and that food may actually be really good quality, but it may not be the food that you want to have them on long term, or you may decide actually it's really good quality, I'm going to keep my puppy on it. So, you know, so it's that sort of making sure that you get that information in there and going, okay, not the greatest quality food maybe, so let's make all of these changes and do this, that and the other, and we can help them through that, and we can keep them on track all the way through that as well. So that would be my time to catch them just before they get it, and then I can say, okay, well, you bring your puppy home, that's absolutely fine. They're on this diet. We're going to keep them on that for maybe the first 1 or 2 weeks, but then let's look at something else that's more appropriate to you. Maybe you do want to feed raw. Maybe you do want to feed fresh and look at a brand like Years or Butternut Box or something like that. Or you want to do it yourself. If you want to do it yourself, then I would say, we need to have a really good look at the kind of recipes that you're going to need, making sure that you've got all the right vitamins and minerals in there, the right macronutrients so that you can get all of that in there. How are you going to get your calcium in there so that your calcium or phosphorus ratio is right, so that we're growing good bone.
Yeah.
How are you going to do that if you're feeding a fresh diet and you're doing it yourself? Are you going to get a powder or something? How are you going to make sure that you've got all the right vitamins and minerals in there? Are you going to buy supplements and add them yourself, or are you confident that the foods that you're going to be feeding or it's all in there? And I mean, same with raw feeding as well. Are you going to be confident with all of that? I guess that's the sort of in a sense the sort of the benefits of using those pre-made kibbles and things like that, because they're balanced. But in all honesty, we don't eat a balanced diet every single meal that we eat. We fluctuate all over the place, and I like to feed my dogs a varied diet. But at the same time, I'm not going to turn around to a client and say, you should be feeding your dog X, Y, and Z. I'm going to say feed the best quality that you can afford, that suits your lifestyle and that suits your dog. But it's really important in those first few weeks, months, that we have got really good quality stuff going in there.
Which then sort of brings me on, so then we can sort of finish up. Everything you just said is marvelous. But what about the rescue dog in the rescue set? What kind of diet are they on?
So yeah, they're kind of on a bitsa diet, aren't they? What I call a bitsa diet, bits of this and bits of that. Because of the nature of rescue, it's rescues are expensive. They have high costs from, and food is expensive, and they survive on donations. Um, I mean, we can help rescues by donating better quality foods to them. Um, but a lot of the time, people are just like, oh, let's just go down the supermarket and buy the cheapest £10 bag of kibble and drop it at the rescue. And yes, they're feeding that animal. That if it's an older animal, that and they've had all of the right nutrients and everything pumped into them as a younger animal, I think they can cope with that for a short period of time. Long term, it is probably going to have a detrimental effect on their behavior, and then that could have a detrimental effect on their chances of being rehomed. But yeah, I would say if people that have that are thinking about donating to rescues, then if you can go and buy a good quality kibble. Kibble, I would say, kind of can last a little bit longer. Tinned food, I would say as well. Some of the tins, some of the trays are better quality than some of the kibbles that you get because they're fresher. So I would say go and get your tinned stuff rather than big bags of kibble. With a big bag of kibble, the second you open that up to the air, you've got oxidation happening. The air gets to it, it's deteriorating in quality. We've got bacterial growth going on in there. Very, very rarely do I see people who store large bags of food properly. If you're going to get a big bag of food, that big bag of food might last you 6, 7 weeks. By the time you've hit 3 weeks of that bag being open with all of the air and everything get to it, the quality is probably less than half what it was when you first opened that bag. It's, and then bacterial growth as well. They talk about some of the bacterial growth you get on fresh foods and on raw foods and things like that. Check out the recalls on some of the dry foods out there because of bacterial contamination.
So,
It's amazing. In all my years, I mean, I'll admit to the fact that I feed raw to my guys. In all my years of raw feeding, I think one company had recalls for salmonella contamination, and that's not a company that I've that I've even heard of since. I think they had an issue, everything got recalled. I think they carried on for a little bit longer, and I don't know if they're still they're not here, they're in Wales somewhere. But I've not heard of anything since. You know, you would think that if there was a big bacterial contamination issue with raw food, then all of these brands would, you know, it would be big because all of the pet food companies would be making noise about it. But it just doesn't happen.
Mm.
Because that bacteria is, you know, free, it's frozen. It's, you know, it's frozen, and when it's fresh, that slows bacterial growth. It doesn't stop it, it just slows it. But then you just defrost it and use it as and when, and then you use your general cleaning that, you know, that you would use for handling your own fresh meats and fish and things like that. So, you know, you keep everything nice and clean. Whereas with kibbles, I think people get a little bit lazy with that, and they've just got this big bag open. They'll just scoop out what they need. It goes in the bag. The bag, you know, they might fold it down. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But it's deteriorating quality really, really quickly. You know, the people that are getting it right are the ones that maybe they might open that big bag and put it into smaller bags that are sealable. Um, so they don't get access to the air. You might even also put that bag in a freezer to make sure that we're slowing bacterial growth down. But let's face it, those people that buy bags of kibble don't have the time to be decanting it into smaller bags. And then they probably don't have the freezer space, because if they had the freezer space, they'd refeed raw. So they're not going to do that, are they? So yeah, so when it comes to feeding dogs in rescues, they probably do go through the bags of food quickly because they've got so many dogs to feed. But I would say, you know, maybe a bag, even if it's medium quality from the supermarket, there are a few brands that are in supermarkets that are relatively good quality, and you could add in certain tins of food in there as well, or trays of food. And you can find out which ones are good quality, medium quality, etc., by looking at the All About Dog Food website. I don't want to start reeling off brands and looking particularly biased. I've mentioned a few. I don't want to go too crazy. But they're just examples. But you can check that out and you can make those donations instead, and hope that it does make a behavioral difference to our dogs. But I get it at the moment. Cost of living, it's, you know, we've got us to feed, we've got our own animals to feed, we've got children to feed and clothe and everything else going on. And then also donating to a rescue. You may not have a huge amount of money to donate to that rescue.
Yeah.
Um, so what could we do to help improve quality of diet? Well, this is where I think going to your local supermarket could be quite useful. So we can, I sort of touched on this earlier on, we can improve the quality of a kibble or a diet in general by adding in other things. So adding in things like fresh fruit, fresh veg, different bits of meat, fish, cheeses, you know, all those different things. Adding in different things can straight away improve the quality of the diet. So that's generally called toppers. Um, there's a really good discussion about it in Forever Dog, which was written by Rodney Habib and Dr. Karen Becker Shaw. Uh, it's on, it was released a while ago. I think I think they've done a second book now as well, actually. But they talk about toppers and how to improve the quality of diet that way. But it's about 10% of the overall diet is a topper instead. And it just adds extra macronutrients to the food, and then you get your micronutrients and the vitamins and minerals in that. So that can improve it. And there has been a little bit of research into that as well. I think it was like a 2011 study, and they had two different groups of dogs running alongside each other. But I think it was a cancer study specifically. But they looked at the instances of cancer in these two different groups of dogs, and some dogs were just fed on like a kibble diet, some were fed on a kibble diet with like toppers and things. And I think the instances of cancer were higher in the dogs that were just fed on the kibble. So, you know, why is that? You know, there's so much research that goes into it. And then if you're looking at very specific health conditions, then you can tweak diet in very specific ways. So cancers and things, adding in cruciferous greens and things, because we found that that can help with stopping the growth of cancer cells and things like that. Heart conditions and things as well. You know, we sometimes see potassium problems in dogs that have got heart conditions. Are there particular foods that we can add to a diet that can help with that, or do we need supplements that are a lot stronger? So Yeah, I mean, there and again, if you're looking at that sort of thing, there is not Dr. Connor Brady's book, which is really good. That's very researchy, lots of stuff in there. And there is oh, what is it? Dr. Jean Dodd's Canine Nutrigenomics is another one, and actually that looks at certain health conditions and sort of outlines specific diet formulations that could help with health in with animals that have got very specific health conditions. So yeah, there's some really good literature out there. So you don't have to go diving into big heavy texts and looking at research and things like that. It's a lot of people have broken it down and putting it into books. Um, and then, there's lots more people that are raw feeding these days, and people have written books on it and how to do it. Way back when I first started, it was just the Dr. Ian Billinghurst books, the Barf Diet and Give Your Dog a Bone and all those books. I think, God, crikey, those books are quite old now. um, I've got them and they're certainly yellowing on my bookshelf. But there's a few of those kicking around and you can get them. There's Honey's is a raw food brand. I think they've got their own little book on it as well. So if you sort of sign up to Honey's and start getting your raw food from them, then they'll give you a book on how to do it, which I think is quite nice. And a lot of raw food companies have got their own websites and their own professionals so that you can phone them up and talk to them as well. So it's always a good idea to, talk to people about it. But us as professionals, it's one of the things that we do really need to look at. And,
Yes.
even though we can't specifically advise on diet changes because we don't necessarily know the ins and outs, we can say, okay, well, we can certainly improve a diet by doing this, that, and the other, and also express the importance of how of a really good diet on behavior, especially in those young puppies, because it's going to have a long-term effect on those as they get older, not just physically but mentally.
Thanks, mate. Claire, you've been a bag of information and knowledge. Absolutely love this. Yeah.
That's
And
my brain today, Colin.
just want to say thank you for coming along. And yeah, giving us an insight into behaviour and the diet and behaviour. So Claire, I just want to say thank you, and I shall be looking to have you back soon. So for now, that's goodbye from all of us here at Dog Speak.